I don't know what my accent sounds to other people. I don't know what my accent sounds like. So I asked the lady that, hey, is my accent one of those, sexy accents? and she said that, no. Not even close. And then I asked, okay, well, is this one of those intelligent-sounding accents? And she said that, not that one either. And then I asked, okay, well, what does this accent sound like? And she thought for a long time, and then she said, I think your accent sounds like 4 years ago you had a stroke.
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, November the 6th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and Jesse Cook, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand quote of the day, my take, Varney and Company, and the Medal of Honor presented by former President Donald Trump. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths by David Bahnsen.
No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. Adam Smith. This is true both morally and economically. Man, as moral agents, must pursue conditions of flourishing for all. And while the utopian vision is futile on this side of glory, in a society of free exchange, incentives exist that result in conditions of flourishing and commercial satisfaction for the vast majority of the citizenry. Poverty may not be fully eradicated, but it will not be the majority condition of the society.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
The enemy within. All of the battles of the 1960s, the cracked skulls, the bloody noses, the brief jail time, the joints that had to go unsmoked while we got the tear gas out of our eyes and our lungs, would not have been worth it if we hadn't achieved our main objective, which was seizing the Democratic Party and turning it into a wholly owned subsidiary of the International Revolutionary Movement. And while we took a beating in the election of 1968, when Tricky crushed our war hero George McGovern, we didn't really care, since we knew the real victory had already been won. We had seized the levers of power, and with our huge cohort, would not easily give them up again. Certainly not in our lifetime. I've mentioned before how easy it all was, although it may not have seemed that way at the time to stalwarts like Che and his comrades. But once through the test of blood and iron, victory was pretty much inevitable. And for one simple reason. The generation that had survived the Great Depression and had won the big one just didn't have the strength or the heart to fight us anymore. After all, as we kept reminding them, we are your children. And who wants to see his kid's head busted up by some pig cop wielding a truncheon? We bled for your sins. Aside from Kent State, which caught us completely by surprise, we were fairly secure in the knowledge that in the end, you would not turn your weapons on us. And Kent State, of course, was not generational warfare, but intragenerational. The shooters were the kids too dumb to get into Kent State. The whole world is watching, we shouted. And the cameras dutifully showed up to lovingly record every chipped tooth. There was one other thing at work, the congenital flaw in the very idea of Western civilization, which was this. Deep down, the hegemonistic white male patriarchy has always been fascinated by the imminence of its own destruction. It's as if some primitive self-defense gene got bred out of your species along the way, and the culture that gave the pristine green world almost all of its polluting technology can no longer wait to see the whole thing collapse. You're suffused with self-loathing. You know you had it too easy, that you don't really deserve all this so-called goodness, that your lives are a lie, and that the country you imagine you inhabit is nothing more than an illusion. Or maybe that's just us projecting again. Still, you remind those few of us who had a proper upbringing of Wotan at the end of Wagner's Ring Cycle, helplessly watching as Valhalla burns, and knowing that it was the only possible outcome. Original sin is a useless concept, unless we are using it against you. Which brings me to our ultimate strategy. Next to Alinsky's famous treatise, and its predecessor, Reveille for Radicals, perhaps the greatest tactical manual ever written comes from the tag team of Cloward and Piven, who in a famous article in 1966 for the left-wing magazine The Nation, outlined both a strategy for bringing down the United States to overwhelm the system by placing impossible but morally indisputable demands upon it, and the tactics with which to implement it. For those of you who don't read The Nation, which is nearly every man, woman, and child in the nation, living, dead, and yet unborn, it describes itself as the oldest continuously published weekly in the U.S., dating back to its founding in 1865, when it supported the anti-slavery Union side in the Civil War, which was probably the first and last patriotic moment in its history. Since then, it has evolved into an unabashed pro-communist, pro-Soviet, anti-American journal of liberal elite opinion. Of course, that doesn't mean it has ever been factually right about anything. Indeed, the Nation kicked off its storied inability to miss plain facts when it published in 1868 an article by John William DeForest, a novelist and Civil War veteran from Connecticut, who began the search for the great white whale of American letters in the title of his Nation essay, The Great American Novel. Moby Dick, the actual great American novel, was published in 1851. Oh well. Truth be told, the Nation isn't even really much of a magazine, more like a newspaper pretending to be a very short book. I used to gaze upon it in wonder as a kid, when I flipped through the yellowing pages of the lovingly collected back issues, looking for racy pictures and never finding any. It's a cut above those mimeograph things I've heard they used to have back in the old days, but not by much. And yet, for some odd reason, people seem to take it seriously, the way they do another openly subversive publication, the New York Review of Books, which somehow never seems to be about the books it's ostensibly reviewing, but instead acts as a kind of official compendium of whatever lunatic ideas we have floating around inside our heads every 2 weeks. Cloward and Piven, or to give these unsung heroes their full names, Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, articulated their simple but brutally effective roadmap for subversion in an article entitled The Weight of the Poor, a Strategy to End Poverty. Well, you know when you see a colon that you're in the presence of two big-domed academics. And in fact you are, because oddly enough, both Cloward and Piven were sociologists at Columbia University's School of Social Work. Oh, and did I mention they were both political activists as well? And Democrats? Columbia being the American refuge of our sterling forebears, the Frankfurt School sappers. It's no surprise that the recipe for municipal meltdown was cooked up in Morningside Heights.
And that was the beginning part of Chapter 10 of Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 13. There are 4 classes of ideologue, but only the first 2 constitute terminal worldviews. The retrograde must know them and be able to spot them in real time. All adults of sound mind, yes, technically even radicals, qualify, fit into one of the following ideological categories. Retrogrades and radicals sit on the 2 opposite poles. Sadly for now, the latter is a much more capacious group than the former. Between them are 2 kinds of moderate. Militant mods are usually lukewarm liberals with some extrinsic reason for not calling themselves such or for militantly clinging to a false middle. Mod cons are faint-hearted but good-hearted people who sometimes call themselves conservatives, sometimes not, comprising the more or less decent folk who simply need good leadership but almost always lack it. The emphasis of this rule is upon public engagement in dialogue. Private engagement is a different animal altogether. As Dostoevsky often wrote, one-on-one engagement, even with a radical, proffers a unique opportunity at conversation, a rare gift from God. Together, getting into a jam and out of it, or sharing some unexpected solemn experience with no one else around, often makes die-hard friends out of bitter foes. Chance run-ins with estranged family members often lead to resolution. Strangers on an airplane sometimes bond deeply after an in-flight near miss. Autograph seekers dream about getting caught in an elevator with their heroes. These instances are some of life's most random and unexpected beauties. Capitalize on these opportunities, should they ever arise. But accordingly, they remain rare and unplannable. Mostly, the retrograde will engage radicals, militant mods, and mod cons out in view of others. Moreover, the engagement will usually involve a public appeal. a one-size-fits-all address to any and all listeners. We will proceed with the simplest first. In terms of public engagement, radicals always must be beaten at their own game, badly, definitively, and mercilessly. Publicly defeating them is the only conceivable way to reach them, and even then they almost never heed defeat's wisdom. Direct engagement in the combat of ideas fails for radicals, since their ideas fail facially, which is why they interrupt, shout, and set things on fire when they dialogue with retrogrades. By using these rules to overcome the radicals' histrionics and tantrums, one sees that they can very easily be beaten, but only very rarely converted, save for in private engagement, which again is rare. As such, usually public engagements with radicals don't accrue to the radicals' benefit, but rather for that of nearby third parties. Those nearby third parties will always be either militant mods or mod cons. Your target, convert, is the mod con, who is open-minded, friendly, and usually center-right, with a sinking suspicion about the truth. He is the unbrainwashed man of common sense. Militant mods, remember, are usually cowardly liberals who feel precluded by lifestyle accoutrements from self-billing as lefties, meaning they've made up their minds and already hate you almost as much as radicals do. Occasionally, you'll meet a militant mod who is truly militant about centrism rather than crypto-leftism. These are also non-convertible, but for different reasons. The key to winning over mod cons in your public forensics against radicals, or against cheeky militant mods who sometimes like to argue for centrism, is to rhetorically obliterate your interlocutor and to ooze magnanimity in victory. By this, Aristotelian magnanimity is designated, not false humility. This means calm confidence in victory, without any regret, but with a thoughtful mien, showing you've been victor many times before, i.e., this isn't new, and you'll maintain an element of mystery, i.e., surprisingly, you wish the best for your opponent. Conversion. Usually, mod cons will approach you privately after the debate, expressing their admiration, which will burgeon further if you look like a good-willed champ who's used to winning, but is mysteriously somewhat aloof to it all. In the dining car of a train traveling from L.A. to Chicago on the way to a philosophy conference, I once debated a stately Chicagoan who declared to the blue-haired SJW next to him that the American dream was a sham. I pointed out with a friendly smile that his statement was the sham. At least 3 of the 4 of us, my wife was next to me, were non-aristocrats, eating good food and availed of comfortable means of travel, sitting together peaceably expressing conflicting ideas as the sun set over the beautiful Rocky Mountains in the distance. That is the American dream, I told him, explaining that he was defining the term American dream wrong, i.e., it's not a guarantee that everyone will be equally or fantastically wealthy. An hour-long debate ensued. I prevailed. The next day, I was approached by a mod con who had been sitting 2 tables away and who described himself as a closeted conservative Hollywood screenwriter, one who had been inspired by my performance to emerge from his cover. These fights are clearly worth having.
And that was Rules for Retrogrades, Rule 13 by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
The type of leadership necessary for victory. As opposed to just slowing down the rate of liberal growth, most Republicans, and even, sadly, most conservatives, only aspire to. The anti-constitutional monstrosity known as Obamacare will be a massive boon to government sector employee unions. Yet while you had some principled Republicans like U.S. Senators Ted Cruz and Mike Lee leading a movement to defund it once and for all, they were opposed by posers and their ruling class human shields disguised as commentators on Fox News, who just wanted more empty and worthless votes to repeal it instead. Republicans have voted more than 40 times to repeal Obamacare, knowing it would go nowhere since Obama is obviously not going to repeal his own signature bill. See, that's low-lying fruit. They believe you're so stupid that they can tell you they voted to repeal it, you'll be satisfied, and then they'll be off the hook for its implementation. That's why the Republican majority in the House of Representatives, where the Constitution says all appropriations begin, have to defund Obamacare. It's the only way to stop it. It's not a tactic. It's a duty. But that's hard and might offend the ruling elite and liberal media. So they'd rather just allow the biggest promotion of abortion, an unprecedented threat to religious liberty, just ask Hobby Lobby and Little Sisters of the Poor, and a bill that will raise health insurance premium rates by more than 30% according to the Associated Press. They'd just rather allow it to take effect instead. After all, it's not like the ruling class needs to worry. They can just exempt themselves from some of Obamacare's more punitive provisions if they need to. In a war, you cannot claim victory as long as the enemy's infrastructure is still in place. Winning happens when you've dismantled your opponent's infrastructure and forced them to unconditionally surrender. Walker has done that in Wisconsin, and Jindal undertook the same in Louisiana. Senators like Cruz and Lee are trying to do the same in Washington, D.C. Sadly, they are the precious few examples to cite. When we get leaders like this, we need to do everything we can to encourage and assist them. We desperately need more leaders like them. I believe if you read and follow the 10 Commandments in this book, you will help these leaders finish the job they started and help us generate more leaders willing to be as bold. Unfortunately, the old guard accuses us of being purists, as if I, as a Christian, should be insulted by that, for demanding we actually try to win rather than just lose a little slower. But the reality is we're the ones being the most pragmatic here. We believe we do not have another generation to waste on 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, partisan and hypocritical silliness. This is now about the cultural equivalent to a survival instinct, and folks need to either lead or get out of the way. It doesn't get any more pragmatic than being motivated by the most basic human instinct, survival. Besides, what the old guard defines as pragmatism is really defeatism at a slower, more manageable pace. We don't trust the leadership of the Republican Party any more than we trust the Democrats, but are pragmatically willing to use the GOP's infrastructure as the most convenient vehicle to engage the political system to fight for our freedom and liberty. We do not believe there is any such thing as a fiscal conservative, but there are only conservatives. Fiscal conservatives and pro-life Democrats are like unicorns, figments of our imagination. A fiscal conservative is code language for a materialist who just wants more mammon. David Barton at Wall Builders has documented for years that the more staunchly pro-life and pro-family someone is, the more staunchly they stand for limited government. If you can't trust a politician to defend your life, you definitely can't trust them to defend your money. Besides, good luck slashing the size of government without defending the family, since the breakdown of the family is the impetus for the welfare state in the first place. Not to mention the more immoral a people become, the bigger the government always gets, because the first thing an immoral people want to avoid is paying for their own mistakes. A welfare state profits off the basis of bad behavior, and then cost shifts the bill to those who make sound decisions. We do not romanticize the Republicans as the good guys and the Democrats as the bad, but see the leadership of both parties as part of a ruling class, thank you, Anthony Codevilla, that is more concerned with maintaining their own gravy train than honoring their sworn oaths to uphold and defend the Constitution of these United States.
And that was next part of Chapter 2, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again, by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
The road to healing is always blocked. Mind you, not sometimes, not most of the time, always blocked. But one of the forms this takes is the resistance of the crowd. Try it sometime. You're trying to break free of the structures of sin. You're trying to turn your life over to Christ. How much support do you get? Oh, you get some, sure. But more often than not, you'll get exactly the reaction of this crowd. Come on, leave him alone. Stop this. It's embarrassing. But don't be cowed by it. Listen now to Bartimaeus. But he kept calling out all the more. And so Bartimaeus, despite the opposition of the crowd, despite the fact that he's been sitting there in his blindness probably for years or decades, despite that, when he knows that Jesus is close, he begs and he begs and he begs. Good. You and I need to do exactly the same thing, especially when the crowd is mocking us.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand quote of the day.
I don't believe that whole story about shrinking resources. They are shrinking because freedom is shrinking. In a free economy, if any particular resource became scarce long before we would feel the shortage, there would be several different substitute elements or goods invented to take its place. And also in a free economy, you would not use your knowledge and technology to build oil refineries and oil wells for tribal savages and then permit them to nationalize it and hold you out for
Thank you. And now, my take.
That's the markets as we start a new week. Now this. Saturday morning, the New York Times releases a bombshell poll. Biden loses to Trump in 5 of 6 battleground states. He's losing support among young people, blacks and Hispanics. His coalition is fractured. His re-election chances are slim and none. That's just my opinion. By Saturday afternoon, things have gotten worse. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib released a video about Gaza. It ended with this in bold letters. Joe Biden supported the genocide of the Palestinian people. The president accused of genocide by a member of his own party. It's come to that. The alarm bells are ringing. Politics is all about putting forward a candidate who can win. When you know your guy isn't going to win, you change the candidate. Obama's senior advisor, David Axelrod, wants Biden to just step aside. Obama himself has suddenly reappeared. Is Michelle going to be the Democrats' savior? Just saying. The problem is that Democrats cannot fire the president. They must persuade him to step aside. The pressure is intense. The New York Times, look at this headline. Joe Biden is in trouble. The Wall Street Journal, a 5-alarm Biden re-election fire, end quote. Maybe a little history is in order here. In 1968, President Johnson performed badly in the New Hampshire Democrat primary. 30 days later, on national TV, he dropped out of the race. He knew he couldn't win. That's where the Democrats are today. They know the Biden-Harris team cannot win, and they have very little time to get them out. And they also know that if the president is incapacitated in any way, we will have President Harris. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
And so he says, in my opinion, or that's my opinion. First of all, it's kind of redundant. We get the idea that that's your opinion, but why phrase it that way in the first place? Why not just say, that's the way it is? What's he afraid of? Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Stuart Varney and Company.
So President Joe Biden at an event today talking about Bidenomics. He's talking about getting more money to Amtrak at an event in Delaware. Back to you.
Got it. Thanks, Edward. Jewish students on college campuses continue to fear for their safety.
So that's the point, is the Jewish students on campus that continue to fear for their safety, of course. Why is it that there seems to be so many people that are coming out to support Hamas, but nobody supports coming out to support Israel? It's simple. Israel are the nice guys. Israel, nobody's afraid of Israel. If you come out and say down with Israel, you don't have to worry that the IDF is going to send a hit squad out to kill you. But what if you say no to Hamas, right? Somebody says we're having a rally today at the White House in support of free Palestine. Are you going to be there? Do you have the guts to say no? Because remember, Hamas is the people that butchered people, burned them alive. And you know that if Hamas can do that in Israel, they can get into Israel and do that. It's not that much a big leap to believe that they can get into the United States, especially with an open southern border, and do the same thing to you. So the vast majority of these people that are coming out with their anti-Israeli statements are scared to death. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, former President Donald Trump presents the Medal of Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as we mark this ceremony in a word of prayer. The Lord is my light and my salvation, and whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, and of whom shall I be afraid? Righteous, just, and loving God, today we gather to honor the spirit of a warrior who put others' safety above his own and ran toward danger, meeting it face to face. We give thanks for Staff Sergeant David Bellavia, an example of heroism, whose spirit shone bright in the darkest hours of battle. His character, commitment, and courage were revealed in a moment, but they were forged over a lifetime by his faith, his family, his friends, and a disciplined life of selfless devotion to duty. God bless David, his family, and his many comrades in arms this very day. Let his life, legacy, and indeed this very medal that is placed around his neck be an inspiration for all to face our fears and place others over self. I pray these things in your mighty and most holy and gracious name. Amen.
Thank you very much, please. Thank you, Chaplain, very much. It's really beautiful. Today is my privilege to award the highest military honor to an American soldier who demonstrated exceptional courage to protect his men and defend our nation. Will you please join me in welcoming Staff Sergeant David Bellavia. David, thank you. David is the first living recipient to earn the Congressional Medal of Honor for his bravery in the Iraq War. And we're honored to have with us distinguished leaders of our military. I want to recognize Acting Deputy Secretary of Defense, David Norquist. David, thank you very much, and congratulations. Acting Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy. Come here, Ryan. Let me just say hello to you. Congratulations. It just happened yesterday, so I have to congratulate. Congratulations. Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Paul Selva. Thank you, Paul. Army Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley. Hi, Mark. And Sergeant Major of the Army, Daniel Daly. Thank you, Daniel, very much. Thanks as well to members of Congress who join us. Representative Liz Cheney. Thanks, Liz. Chris Collins. Thanks, Chris. Dan Crenshaw. Tom Reed. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I see you over there, Tom. Thank you very much. Joining David for this special ceremony are his wife, Deanna, and 3 children, Evan, Aiden, and Vivian, along with his mother, Marilyn, and his brothers, Daniel and Rand. I want to thank you all for being here. Very special day for you and for all of us, for the nation, actually. Thank you. Thank you. David's father, William, passed away in 2017, and though he's no longer with us, we know that today he must be one of those proud dads. He's looking down upon us from heaven, and he's very proud of his son and his son's family. I have to say that. Thank you, David. Finally, we are gratified to be joined by 8 previous Medal of Honor recipients, and I have to tell you, I've got to know just about all of them. You are forever with us. You inspire us. You are truly brave, great people. Thank you very much for being here. Brave people. David grew up in Western New York. He was the youngest of 4 children. As a boy, he would listen to stories from his grandfather, a World War II veteran and hero in his own right, who earned a Bronze Star in the Normandy campaign. I just came back from Normandy. That was something. As David remembers, his grandfather's stories were always vivid, with source of pride, and they were delivered very beautifully. There was a nobility and purpose in the infantry, and David saw that at a very young age. I wanted to be what my grandfather was. David would often say, I wanted to be part of this noble adventure. Is that right? It's a pretty good quote, would you say? Better say yes, otherwise I have a problem. In 1999, David followed the example of his grandfather and joined the United States Army Infantry. Several months after the September 11th attack on our nation, David deployed, saying goodbye to his wife and his son, Evan. He served in Germany, Kosovo, and then in Iraq. In November of 2004, after nearly a year of intense enemy combat in Iraq, David led his squad into battle to liberate the city of Fallujah and anti-Iraq forces. That was a tough place. This operation was the bloodiest battle of the Iraq War. For 3 days straight, David and his men kicked down doors, searched houses, and destroyed enemy weapons, never knowing where they would find a terrorist lurking next, and there were plenty of them. The 3rd day of battle was November 10th, David's 29th birthday. That night, his squad was tasked with clearing 12 houses occupied by insurgents. Very dangerous operation. They entered house after house and secured 9 of the buildings. Then came the 10th. That was a tough one. It was a 3-story building surrounded by a 9-foot wall. As they entered the house and moved into the living room, 2 men were behind concrete barricades. They opened fire on David and everybody. In the dark of night, shards of glass, brick, and plaster flew into the air, wounding multiple soldiers. The rounds of fire ripped holes into the wall, separating the Americans from the terrorists. The wall was ripped to shreds. David knew they had to get out. David thought that they had it. He leapt into the torrent of bullets and fired back at the enemy without even thinking. The insurgents, he just took over. David took over. He provided suppressive fire while his men evacuated, rescuing his entire squad at the risk of his own life. Only when his men were all out did David exit the building. But the fighting was far from over. Militants on the roof fired down at them with round after deadly round. A Bradley fighting vehicle came to the scene to suppress the enemy and drove them further into the building. Knowing that he would face almost certain death, David decided to go back inside the house and make sure that not a single terrorist escaped alive or escaped in any way. He quickly encountered an insurgent who was about to fire a rocket-propelled grenade. at his squad. David once again jumped into danger and killed him before he had a chance to launch that grenade. Next, 2 more insurgents came out of hiding and fired at David. He returned fire, killing them both. Then a 3rd assailant burst out of a wardrobe, wearing a wardrobe, and opened fire. David shot and wounded the man, but he escaped up the stairs. Racing after him, David engaged in hand-to-hand combat and killed him too. Bleeding and badly wounded, David had single-handedly defeated the forces who had attacked his unit and would have killed them all had it not been for the bravery of David. Just then, yet another combatant jumped down from the 3rd-story roof and attacked. David shot him, and the assailant fell off the balcony. Alone in the dark, David killed 4 insurgents and seriously wounded the 5th, saving his soldiers and facing down the enemies of civilization. Here with us today are 32 American service members who fought with David in Iraq, including 12 who are with David on that very, very horrible and dangerous November night. Please stand. Did he do a good job? If not, it's not too late. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it very much. Also with us are 5 families of David's brothers in arms who made the supreme sacrifice. To the Gold Star families of Sean Sims, Stephen Falkenberg, Scott Lawson, J.C. Madison, and Michael Carlson, our entire nation expresses our love, loyalty, and everlasting gratitude. Please stand. Please. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you. David often tells young people, Americans don't want to fight, but if someone picks a fight with us, we will always win because we don't fight for awards or recognition. We fight for love of our country, our homeland, our family, and our unit, and that's stronger than anything the enemy has. So thank you, and thank you to his family very much. Great family, David. Thank you. David exemplifies the same warrior ethos that gave his grandfather and all of the heroes of Normandy the strength to defeat evil exactly 75 years ago. I hear that his grandfather, Joseph, is now 99 years old and that today he's watching this ceremony at his home in Jamestown, New York. A lot of people are watching, David. America is blessed with the heroes and great people like Staff Sergeant Bellavia, whose intrepid spirit and unwavering resolve defeats our enemies, protects our freedoms, and defends our great American flag. David, today we honor your extraordinary courage. We salute your selfless service, and we thank you for carrying on the legacy of American valor that has always made our blessed nation the strongest and mightiest anywhere in the world. And we're doing better today than we've ever done. Our country is stronger now, and we're doing better economically than ever before. We're setting records, and you fought for something that's really good, and we appreciate it, David. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And now I'm very pleased to ask the military aide to come forward while I present the Congressional Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant David Bellavia. Please.
President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant David G. Bellavia, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Staff Sergeant David G. Bellavia distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty on November 10, 2004, while serving as squad leader in support of Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq. While clearing a house, a squad from Staff Sergeant Bellavia's platoon became trapped within a room by intense enemy fire coming from a fortified position under the stairs leading to the second floor. Recognizing the immediate severity of the situation and with disregard for his own safety, Staff Sergeant Bellavia retrieved an automatic weapon and entered the doorway of the house to engage the insurgents. With enemy rounds impacting around him, Staff Sergeant Bellavia fired at the enemy position at a cyclic rate, providing covering fire that allowed the squad to break contact and exit the house. A Bradley fighting vehicle was brought forward to suppress the enemy. However, due to high walls surrounding the house, it could not fire directly at the enemy position. Staff Sergeant Bellavia then re-entered the house and again came under intense enemy fire. He observed an enemy insurgent preparing to launch a rocket-propelled grenade at his platoon. Recognizing the grave danger the grenade posed to his fellow soldiers, Staff Sergeant Bellavia assaulted the enemy position, killing one insurgent and wounding another who ran to a different part of the house. Staff Sergeant Bellavia, realizing he had an uncleared, darkened room to his back, moved to clear it. As he entered, an insurgent came down the stairs firing at him. Simultaneously, the previously wounded insurgent reemerged and engaged Staff Sergeant Bellavia. Staff Sergeant Bellavia, entering further into the darkened room, returned fire and eliminated both insurgents. Staff Sergeant Bellavia then received enemy fire from another insurgent emerging from a closet in the darkened room. Exchanging gunfire, Staff Sergeant Bellavia pursued the enemy up the stairs and eliminated him. Now on the second floor, Staff Sergeant Bellavia moved to a door that opened onto the roof. At this point, a fifth insurgent leapt from the third floor roof onto the second floor roof. Staff Sergeant Bellavia engaged the insurgent through a window, wounding him in the back and legs, and caused him to fall off the roof. Acting on instinct to save the members of his platoon from an imminent threat, Staff Sergeant Bellavia ultimately cleared an entire enemy-filled house, destroyed 4 insurgents, and badly wounded a 5th. Staff Sergeant Bellavia's bravery, complete disregard for his own safety, and unselfish and courageous actions are in keeping with the finest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Army.
Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.